The wind is up again. It pushes salt spray over the seawall, and it lands on my lips. I wipe it off with my sleeve and keep my face turned down toward the dark water so nobody out there can catch the pale shine of skin. The dock under my boots has that soft, tired flex that old pilings get when the tide moves under them. Every few seconds, a loose halyard on the nearest boat taps a mast, and I want to climb up and tie it off, but I do not. One noise can turn into 10 noises. 10 noises can turn into a boat drifting closer to check what made them. I keep still, hands on the cold rail, listening for anything that does not belong to wind, water, and our own quiet mistakes. Behind me, the facility sits in blackout. No yard lights, no navigation lights, no red exit signs glowing through windows. We covered the last stubborn one with duct tape and a folded shirt, then built a cardboard hood over it. And I still glance back sometimes to make sure it is dead. The only light is the faint green smear from the old watch clock inside the guard shack, and even that is buried under a towel. We learned early that darkness is not a mood. Darkness is a tool. It is the only thing that makes this place feel bigger than the people trying to take it. I hear a metal clink out on the water, and my shoulders tighten in a way I do not name. I lower into a squat and move my weight slow so the dock does not complain. The sound comes again, then stops. A buoy chain maybe, or somebody out there letting a hook touch a gunnel to see if anybody jumps. I slide one hand to the flare pouch on my belt, and the other to the radio clipped high on my vest. The radio stays off unless I need it. Batteries do not come back. Noise does not take back what it gives away. I keep my mouth closed and I watch. This is what our nights became after we took the Decommissioned Naval Support Facility and decided we would rather be trapped than exposed. That sounds clean when I say it in a sentence. The real version is uglier and more practical. We ran from a coastline full of infected and a mainland full of hungry strangers. We found a place built to support ships and men, then left to rot quietly when budgets changed and priorities moved inland. Docks still intact, fuel lines still running under concrete, hardened buildings with steel doors and thick walls, a perimeter fence that still means something if you are willing to patch the gaps. It was not a fortress. It was a half-forgotten machine. We made it ours by learning every squeak and every blind corner. I did not plan to be the one telling this. I was a coffee shop owner before all of this, the kind of job that teaches you routines and how to keep people calm when the line gets long. It does not teach you how to decide whether to let a boat land. Evan did. Evan worked diesel for a tug company, and he can listen to an engine and tell you what it wants. Marisol did not. She was a nurse, and she can look at a face and tell you what it hides. Hank did. Hank served years ago, and he still thinks in checklists when panic tries to get into his mouth. Tara did not. Tara taught 5th grade, and she has the quiet kind of courage that shows up after everybody else talks. Owen did. Owen grew up around docks and lines, and knows what breaks first when the weather turns. We ended up together the same way most groups form now, not from friendship, but from proximity, and an agreement that getting through the next hour matters more than personal history. The day we reached this place, the sky was a flat gray, and the coastline looked empty in the wrong way. No fishing boats, no wake trails, no gulls swarming over anything. That last part should have felt peaceful. It did not. The shoreline had scattered movement that looked random until you watched longer. People stumbling in the shallows, clothes hanging, arms drifting in slow arcs. Infected do not do anything with purpose except move toward sound and movement. You learn that quickly. We kept our little workboat well off the beach and followed the old chart Hank sketched on a greasy notepad from memory. The entrance channel still existed. The buoys were still there, sun-bleached and crooked. And for a second my brain tried to pretend we were just taking a wrong turn into a marina. Then an infected body rolled in the swell near the channel marker and dragged a hand on the plastic float. I kept my eyes forward and kept the throttle steady. The facility sat on a spit of land with a narrow causeway to the mainland. Years ago, that causeway had a guard gate and a badge reader and cameras. When we arrived, the cameras were dead and the badge reader was a cracked box full of rainwater. The gate still stood. The fence still ran along both sides, chain link with barbed wire on top. The place was shut down officially, but it had never been demolished, never cut into scrap. It felt forgotten, which meant it had not been crawled over by every desperate person on the coast yet. That was the first time in weeks that I let myself believe we might have a chance. We did not step onto land and celebrate. We did not run toward buildings and start picking rooms. Hank stopped us at the base of the causeway and pointed to the tire marks in the grit, fresh enough to still have edges. Somebody had driven here after the roads went bad. Somebody had left, or somebody had not. Evan killed the engine, and we drifted under the lee of the pier, letting the boat bump soft against rubber fenders. Owen went first, because Owen moves in dock spaces without thinking, hands always finding rails, feet always testing surfaces. I followed with the long pry bar we kept for doors. Tara held the small metal toolbox with our last decent bolt cutters. Marisol carried the bag with bandages and antibiotics, and the tiny bottle of pain pills that we treated like gold. Hank brought the rifle and did not point it at anything unless he had to. That mattered. People who wave guns around tend to shoot friends by accident. We cleared the nearest buildings the slow way, doors open only after listening, corners taken wide and quiet. We found signs of past life that had stopped mid-task, a clipboard still hanging on a nail, a coffee mug cracked on the floor, a stack of old uniforms in a locker room, damp with mildew. No bodies in the first building, just the smell of old sweat and old cleaning solution. The second building had an infected in a storage closet. The infected did not lunge fast. It shuffled out when Tara's boot scuffed a chair leg. It made that wet throat sound that carries over everything. Hank lifted his hand, not the rifle, his hand, telling us to freeze. Evan stepped back until his shoulders touched the wall. Marisol moved behind me, and I felt her fingers clamp on the back of my belt to keep from bumping into me. Owen grabbed a metal mop handle from a janitor cart without looking away. He pinned the infected against the door frame and held it there. I swung the pry bar once, hard, at the side of the head. The infected dropped. There was no shouting, no cheering. We dragged it outside and pushed it over the edge into the water. That part was not brave. That part was hygiene. After that, the work started. Taking a place is never one action. It is hours of small choices that pile up until you realize you are either settled or dead. We moved through the facility in a pattern. One person on the door, one person on the corner, one person searching. We marked cleared rooms with strips of torn cloth tied to handles. We did not mark them with paint, because paint smells and paint means you plan to stay. We were not ready to admit we planned anything. The barracks were empty, except for rats and damp mattresses. The admin building had a few battery lanterns in a drawer, dead batteries inside them. The maintenance shop had tools that made Evan's face change. Wrenches, sockets, a chain hoist, bins of bolts, spare fuel filters still wrapped in plastic. The generator building was locked, and that lock became our first real argument. Evan wanted to cut it. Hank wanted to listen for movement inside. Marisol wanted to wait until daylight so we could see what we were doing. Tara stood between the men and said we would do what keeps fingers attached. We waited. That was the rule taking shape right there. We wait when rushing only saves pride. We opened the generator building with a crowbar and patience and a hammer. Not the dramatic kind of crowbar swing, the slow kind, wedge, tap, until the latch gave. The smell inside was oil, old coolant, and metal dust. 3 big generators sat in a row, covered in gray tarps that had been tied down tight. Somebody shut this place down with care. Evan pulled one tarp back and ran his hand over the engine casing, then held up his fingers to show me the fine dust. He nodded once, satisfied, then crouched to check the fuel lines. Hank watched the corners and ceiling while Evan did what Evan does. I stood by the door and stared out into the yard, feeling the size of the facility and wondering how many people could hide behind its buildings with a rifle. Marisol started opening cabinets and whispering item names under her breath, inventorying in her head. Tara found the wall-mounted emergency panel and flicked switches even though none of it had power. It was a habit from teaching, a need to understand the room. We got 1 generator running that day. Evan primed the fuel line by hand, bled air out of the system, checked oil, then told me to stand near the shutoff in case the engine ran away. I did not ask what that meant. I just placed my hand where he pointed and stayed there. When Evan hit the starter, the sound was huge in the concrete building. It was not a roar. It was a heavy, steady violence, pistons doing the same job over and over. Evan winced and killed it immediately. He looked at the ceiling, then at me. "People will hear that," he said. He did not say it loud. He did not need to. Hank nodded and walked to the door to check the yard again. Tara stared at the generator with the expression she used on rowdy kids. The expression that says, "You are a problem, and I am going to solve you." We decided right there that power would be rationed the way people used to ration water on boats. Short runs, planned tasks, windows covered, no lights outside. Evan built a crude sound baffle using spare insulation panels and plywood from the maintenance shop. Owen found old rubber mats, and we nailed them over vents that faced the yard, leaving enough airflow so we did not cook the engine. When we ran the generator, we ran it at midday when the wind was highest and surf noise covered some of the engine note. It still made me flinch every time, not from pain, from the knowledge that sound travels farther than you want it to. The causeway became our obsession. It was the only easy way in. Everything else required a boat. That meant if we controlled the causeway and controlled the water approach, we controlled the facility. The guard gate was still there, plus 2 concrete vehicle barriers that somebody had installed years earlier. We pushed those barriers with the forklift we found in the maintenance yard, the tires half flat but usable. Evan drove the forklift with a cigarette hanging from his lip even though none of us wanted smoke. He did not light it. He just needed something in his mouth to focus. Owen guided the barrier placement with hand signals. Hank watched the mainland side through binoculars. Tara and Marisol carried rolls of chain and a box of padlocks we found in the supply cage. I carried the bolt cutters and kept thinking how stupid it is that a tool can feel more important than a gun. We built a layered block. First the gate, then a line of concrete barriers angled to force any vehicle to slow and turn. Then a second line of barriers that forced a stop. Then a strand of chain-link fence cut from a collapsed section and wired across, not strong enough to stop a truck, strong enough to slow a man on foot. We put the last barrier close enough to the fence that a person would have to climb. Climbing makes noise. Climbing makes a body pause in the open. Hank wanted a clear lane where he could see anybody coming. Tara wanted a lane where nobody could come fast. We compromised. The lane existed, narrow, zigzag, and it funneled visitors into a space where we could see hands and faces. That lane was the most valuable thing we built, and it cost us half a day, 2 gallons of fuel, and most of our remaining strength. We disabled the navigation lights the first night. There were 2 small towers along the pier and one at the end of the breakwater. The lights were dead already, but the control boxes still had reflectors and old solar panels mounted nearby, cracked and dirty. Hank said light attracts boats even if the light is only rumor. He was right. A familiar structure attracts curious people. We took bolt cutters and a screwdriver and opened every control box we could find. We cut wires, pulled fuses, smashed bulbs, then covered the housings with black plastic bags and tape so moonlight would not catch on glass. That part felt paranoid until the second week, when scavenger boats started drifting offshore at dusk, stopping in the darker patches of water to listen. The first storm hit before we were ready. It came in fast, a low-pressure system that turned the horizon into a dirty wall. Owen smelled it first. He stood on the pier with his nose lifted and said the air changed. Evan checked the weather radio and got only static and a single broken alert tone that sounded tired. Hank watched cloud movement and said we would get high winds and surge. Marisol started pulling supplies into the hardened admin building without being told. Tara went to the barracks and stripped every usable blanket, every towel, every piece of fabric we could use to stop drafts or wrap injuries. I went to the fuel pier and stared at the big fuel lines running under the concrete. Then imagined salt water pushing into seals and filling tanks with brine. I did not have a fix for that. I just stood there and accepted the problem. We spent the hours before the storm doing ugly work. We doubled mooring lines on our workboat and moved it to the most protected slip we could find, tucked behind a warehouse where wind would hit it less. Evan shut valves on the fuel system and marked their positions with tape. Owen and I climbed down under the pier with headlamps covered in red film, checking for loose boards and anything that would rip free and turn into a battering ram. Hank walked the fence line, tightening improvised wire ties, pushing against posts to see which ones moved. Tara and Marisol set up the admin building as our shelter, not the barracks. The admin building had fewer windows, thicker doors, and a hallway layout that allowed one person to cover approach points. That choice was not about comfort. It was about control. When the storm arrived, it came with noise that filled every gap. Rain hammered metal roofs. Wind shoved at doors. The water in the basin lifted and dropped and slapped the pilings with a deep sound that traveled through the dock into my bones. We killed all power and sat in dim light from one hand-crank lantern, faces half-lit, listening for anything that meant structural failure. Every time a big gust hit, Hank stood and walked the hallway, palm pressed to walls, checking for vibration changes. Evan kept trying to go outside to check the generator building vents, convinced the wind would push debris into them. Tara blocked the door with her body and told him no. Evan argued once, then stopped, then sat on the floor and rocked his foot, restless. Marisol unrolled gauze and scissors on a table, preparing for injuries we did not have yet. I stood by the back door that led toward the pier and kept my hand on the lock so I could feel if pressure shifted. The surge brought in things we did not invite. A body hit the seawall during the worst part of the storm, and I heard it even over the wind. It was a dull slap, then a dragging sound that made my stomach turn cold. Hank looked at me. I nodded once and took the pry bar. Owen followed with a boat hook. We opened the back door a crack, and the wind tried to rip it out of our hands. Rain came sideways into the hall. We shoved out into it, heads down, moving from wall to wall. The body was tangled in seaweed and plastic, still moving. The infected mouth opened and closed with rain streaming over its face. It reached without strength. Owen used the hook to pull it away from the wall and guide it toward the edge. I used the pry bar once, quick, then again to be sure. We did not talk. We rolled it over the seawall and watched it vanish into black water. Then we went back inside and bolted the door with shaking hands that I did not mention out loud. After the storm passed, the facility looked smaller. Not because it shrank, because we could see the damage. Debris everywhere. A section of fence bowed inward, where a fallen tree pressed against it from the outside. One warehouse door had peeled back on a hinge, leaving a gap wide enough for a person to slip through. The pier had lost some boards. The workboat sat lower in the water, lines stretched tight, hull scuffed from bumping. Evan walked the generator building and found one vent clogged with shredded plastic. He cleared it and did not say a word, just looked at Tara in a way that carried both apology and stubborn pride. Tara did not say, "I told you so." She just handed him a bottle of water and walked away. That was the first time I saw how we might survive together without killing each other first. We repaired the fence with whatever we had. Chain link cut from a collapsed section. Wire twisted tight with pliers. Old steel shelving bolted to posts as a patch. It was not pretty. It was not permanent. It made noise when the wind pushed it. And that noise became part of our facility sound map. You build a sound map without meaning to. That squeak is loose metal near the motor pool. That rattle is the storm drain cover near the admin building. That hollow clank is the old flagpole halyard tapping. Anything outside that map becomes a warning. That is how my brain works now. Not heroic, just trained by repetition. Food became the next problem. We found a few cases of old emergency rations in a storeroom, expired but still sealed. We ate them anyway, slow, checking for smells, saving the best for days when we needed morale more than calories. We fished from the pier with lines Owen made from spare cord and hooks scavenged from the maintenance shop tackle box. We set crab traps near the pilings. Some days we got enough protein to feel human. Some days we got nothing and ate plain rice cooked on a small camp stove that stank of fuel. Water came from a combination of rain catchment and two big tanks near the maintenance yard that still held clean water under a lid. We treated everything with bleach measured in capfuls. We argued about dosage. Marisol won those arguments because Marisol was the one who had seen what stomach sickness does to a group. The problem with isolation is that it works until it invites testing. A silent facility on a coast becomes a rumor. Rumors travel by boat now. I know this because the first scavenger boat did not come straight to us. It drifted along the coastline at a distance, motor idling low, then stopped near our breakwater. Two men stood on the bow with binoculars. I watched them from the admin building roof through a narrow gap we cut in a tarp. Hank watched beside me, rifle resting on a sandbag. We did not wave. We did not signal. We did not turn on a light. Evan wanted to scare them away. Tara wanted to let them get bored. Marisol wanted to know if one of them looked sick. Owen wanted to move the workboat deeper into cover. We did all of it except the scaring away. We stayed quiet. We moved our boat. We watched until the scavenger boat left. It did not leave far. It circled once, slow, then vanished behind the breakwater and out to sea. That night, we slept in shifts with boots on. I took first watch on the pier with Owen. Owen moved the way a dockman moves, even while tired, stepping around hazards without looking down. He listened to the water and told me what noises were normal in a storm aftermath. A floating log makes a scraping sound on a piling. A loose line makes a dull slap on a hull. A boat hook bumping aluminum makes a higher click. He told me all of that in a low voice. Not a lecture. A transfer of survival knowledge. I nodded and absorbed it, and tried not to think about the fact that my old problems used to be payroll and customer complaints. The scavengers came back 3 days later, closer. This time they approached during late afternoon, sun low, glare on water. They cut engine near our outer marker and coasted in. The boat was a center console with a patched canopy and mismatched fuel tanks strapped down. 2 men on board, 1 woman. All 3 wore life vests, which meant they knew water kills people faster than infected do. The man at the helm raised one hand, palm out, slow, then pointed at the pier. Hank watched through binoculars and whispered descriptions. No obvious weapons visible. That does not mean safe. People hide knives. People hide pistols in waistbands. People hide worse in their tone. The woman stood with her hands up the whole time, which could mean fear or performance. We had a meeting in the admin building hallway, quiet and fast. Hank said we do not let them dock. Tara said if we never talk to anybody, we will die alone with a functioning generator and no spare parts. Evan said we need trade, even if trade is risky. Marisol said sick people travel in groups now because they cannot survive alone. Owen said the boat had enough fuel for range, which meant these people were not desperate yet, which meant they could afford to be dangerous. Everybody looked at me because I had been the one who talked to strangers for a living, back when strangers were only annoying. I hated that moment. I hated the responsibility. I still made a choice. I said we talk to them from the causeway lane, not the pier, and we do it with distance and rules. Hank nodded once and moved to take position. We met them at the zigzag lane on the causeway. Hank stayed behind the second barrier, rifle low but ready. Owen stood off to the side with a boat hook, not a weapon to most eyes, still a weapon in hands that know how to use it. Marisol stood behind me with the medical bag. Tara stood to my left with a clipboard. Not because we needed paperwork, because a clipboard makes a person look official. Evan stayed back near the gate, listening. I walked forward until I reached the point where the lane forced a stop. Then I raised my hand, palm out, and waited. The 3 strangers had come on foot, boat tied up outside our inner basin on the far side of the breakwater. That meant they already had access to water near us. That fact sat in my head heavy. The man in front spoke first. He gave a name, Kyle, and said he wanted to trade fuel stabilizer and marine batteries for antibiotics and filters. His voice was calm in a practiced way. The woman, Jenna, kept her hands visible and her eyes moving, scanning our fence patches, our barrier placement, our sight lines. The third person, a younger man named Luis, looked at the ground a lot. That worried me more than the confident ones. People who look down either hide guilt or hide anger. I told Kyle our rules in plain language. No entry, no docking. Trade happens here. Items placed on the ground, then both sides step back. No sudden movement, no arguments about fairness. If anybody breaks the rules, we leave, and the deal is dead. Kyle smiled a little, then agreed quickly. Too quickly. Tara wrote down his offered items even though we could all remember them. The act of writing slowed everything down and kept us from moving fast. We did one trade that day, and it went clean. Kyle placed a small bottle labeled fuel stabilizer on the pavement. He placed 2 sealed marine batteries beside it. He stepped back. I placed a small box of antibiotics, half our remaining supply, and 2 spare filters Evan wanted for the generator system. I stepped back. Luis walked forward, picked up our items, then backed away. Jenna walked forward, picked up theirs, then backed away. Nobody crossed the invisible middle line. Nobody spoke during the exchange. The whole time, Hank's eyes never left their hands. When it was done, Kyle said he would come back next week. I told him no promises. He laughed, not friendly, then nodded and left. We watched them walk away toward their boat route. Then we watched the water until their vessel became a dot. Evan tested the marine batteries with the meter we found in the maintenance shop. Good charge. He grinned for the first time in days. That grin did not last. That night, the generator coughed during startup and then settled into a rough idle. Evan shut it down and opened the side panel. He stared at the fuel filter housing, then looked at me. "Water in the line," he said. "Storm surge did it, or the tank vent pulled moisture. Either way, it gets worse." He did not say it dramatic. He said it the way a man says a fact that has no argument. We spent the next hours draining a sample from the tank and watching the cloudy separation. Water and diesel do not mix. They sit together and ruin your plans. We built a filtration routine using what we had. Evan rigged a hand pump and a clear hose so we could see what came out. We poured fuel through a funnel lined with cloth, then through the spare filter, then into clean jerry cans. It was slow, back-breaking work. It took hours to make a few gallons safe enough to run the generator for short tasks. Owen found an old fuel polishing cart in a storage shed and nearly shouted with relief, then remembered shouting is a luxury and swallowed the sound. The cart needed a belt. Evan found a belt in a bin of spare parts that still had a tag on it. The tag date was from years ago. That belt became treasure. The scavenger boat returned sooner than promised. 2 days after the trade, I saw it at dusk, drifting outside the breakwater with no lights. That alone broke our pattern. The first approach had been daylight and open. This was night and quiet. Hank joined me on the admin roof, binoculars up. Tara stood below with the radio off, waiting for my hand signal. Evan crouched near the generator building with a flashlight that he refused to turn on. Owen took position near the pier with the boat hook. Marisol stayed in the admin hallway, where she could not be seen, where she could still reach anybody who got hurt. We moved into our practiced positions without talking. That was the real sign we had changed. We were not playing at survival, we were doing it. The boat did not come straight in. It drifted, cut engine, then let the tide carry it closer. I could just make out shapes on deck. More than 3. I counted 5, maybe 6. Somebody lifted binoculars and scanned our dark facility. Somebody else leaned over the side with a long pole, sounding depth. That told me they planned to come closer, maybe even land. We had 2 options: stay invisible and hope they leave, or show presence in a controlled way that says we see you and we are not easy. Hank whispered, 1 light, 1 second. He meant it. 1 quick flash, then darkness again, just enough to let them know we were awake. Tara handed me the flare without speaking. I shook my head. Fire is too much. I used a narrow beam flashlight with a hood, pointed straight at the boat for 1 count, then killed it. The beam showed faces for a heartbeat. I saw Kyle. I saw another man holding something long that could be a rifle. Then the dark swallowed them again. They stopped drifting. The engine did not start. They sat out there quiet. And that quiet pressed on my nerves in a way I did not call fear. It made my fingers keep checking the same knots on the tarp roof hatch. It made Hank adjust his grip on the rifle, then adjust again. Small movements that meant he wanted action, because action is easier than waiting. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, the engine started low, then rose, and the boat turned away. It did not leave the area entirely. It ran a wide loop beyond our breakwater and vanished into open water. We stayed at stations for another hour because leaving too early feels arrogant, and arrogance gets people killed. The next day we found evidence they had tested us. A small skiff, empty, had been cut loose and allowed to drift near our outer pier during the night. It bumped and scraped, making noise, checking whether we would run out to grab it. We did not. It drifted past and hit the seawall, then floated away. Owen and I found the cut rope end snagged on a cleat near the outer marker. Clean cut, intentional. Hank stared at it and said, "They wanted to see our reaction time." Evan said, "They want this place." Tara said, "Then we stop being polite." Marisol said nothing, but her face looked tired in a way that told me she had been holding her breath for days without noticing. We tightened our rules. No one goes alone, even to the bathroom at night. No generator run after dusk. No cooking smells vented toward water. We built a secondary sleeping area in the hardened maintenance office near the generator building, so we could rotate watch without crossing the open yard. We moved supplies into 2 separate caches, so one fire or one raid would not wipe us out. Evan made a list of parts we needed to keep the generator alive. Belts, filters, oil, coolant, a starter solenoid, a battery charger. He wrote the list on the back of an old safety poster and taped it to the wall. That list became a calendar of future risks. Every time I looked at it, I could see our isolation timeline. The second storm came with less warning and more anger. Wind built all day. The water in the basin turned choppy even before the clouds rolled in. Owen said the tide timing was wrong and the surge would come higher. Hank wanted to move our workboat inland behind the warehouses. Evan wanted to keep it ready in case we had to leave fast. Tara wanted it secured, not ready. I watched the debate turn in circles and realized we were arguing because we had no good options. I made the call. We secure it in the protected slip again, and we keep one smaller skiff, the one we found abandoned near the breakwater, tied under the pier with lines we could cut fast. Evan hated it. Evan did it anyway. That is what cooperation looks now, not agreement, compliance for the group. During the storm, the scavengers returned. That sounds impossible until you live through it. People do stupid things in bad weather when they believe the reward is worth it. I saw their boat lights flicker offshore through sheets of rain. Not navigation lights, just brief flashes. Maybe a covered flashlight, maybe a phone screen, maybe somebody smoking. They were out there, using the storm noise as cover. My hands moved without pause. I tugged the hood over the admin window again, checked the towel over the watch clock, then moved to the back door to listen. Hank took position at the hallway corner. Owen went to the pier access door. Evan crouched near the generator building, ready to kill any power draw instantly. Tara held the radio, still off, but her thumb sat on the switch. Marisol stood behind us with the medical bag open, supplies laid out on the floor in a neat line. A sound came from the outer pier, not wind, not wave. A low scrape, then a bump. Owen signaled with his hand, fingers spread, meaning somebody is close. I eased the back door open a crack and peered out into rain. The beam from the distant storm clouds gave enough gray light to see shapes. A small skiff was against our pier, held by someone with a hook pole. Two figures climbed onto the dock, hunched, moving slow. They had rain jackets and head coverings. One carried a bag that looked heavy. The other carried something long and dark. I did not wait for it to become clearer. Hank stepped up behind me and whispered, "No warning." That felt harsh. Then I remembered the cut rope, the bait skiff, the night drifting. I nodded. We did not rush them. We did not shout. We made ourselves visible from a distance and controlled the lane. Owen stepped onto the pier under the cover of the warehouse overhang, raising a flashlight hooded tight so the beam was narrow. He pointed it at the dock boards in front of the intruders, not at their faces, and said in a flat voice, "Stop, back off." The words carried through the rain. The figures froze, then the one with the long object lifted it slightly, maybe to aim, maybe to threaten. Hank fired one round into the pier pilings below the dock line, a warning shot that splashed water and made the intruders jerk back. He did not aim at a person. He aimed at a message. The message landed. Both figures scrambled toward the skiff, slipping on wet boards. The one with the bag dropped it. It hit the pier with a heavy thud. They shoved off and vanished into rain. We waited before approaching the dropped bag. Waiting became our religion. Owen held position at the pier corner with the flashlight off. Hank covered from the admin doorway. Evan watched the yard behind us because danger does not always come from where you stare. Tara stayed inside, radio ready. Marisol stood a step behind me and kept her breathing quiet, face set. I walked to the bag slow and used the pry bar to hook the strap, pulling it toward me without touching it. The bag was a dry bag, expensive, sealed. I nudged it open with the pry bar tip. Inside were bolt cutters, smaller than ours but better condition, a coil of rope and 2 cans of fuel. No food, no medicine, tools and fuel. They had not come to trade, they came to take our ability to resist. I closed the bag and dragged it inside. Then I locked the door and added a second bar across it. After the storm, we found their footprints on the pier and the scrape marks where the skiff had bumped. We also found something else. A small signal flag hung on the outer marker, tied there with fresh cord. It was not an official flag. It was a bright scrap of cloth in a specific pattern, probably meant for another boat to recognize. A mark that says, "Target." Owen cut it down and threw it into a bucket of water until it sank. Hank said we needed to assume more boats would come. Tara said we needed a plan that did not depend on bullets, because bullets run out and noise brings infected drifting in. Evan said we needed a way to make docking physically hard. Marisol said we needed a way to tell sick people from healthy people without letting anyone close. Nobody had a clean answer. We built ugly answers from scrap. We strung a line of floating debris across the inner basin entrance. Old fenders, sealed plastic barrels, pieces of dock foam, all tied together with rope. It would not stop a boat with power, but it would tangle props and slow approach. Owen anchored it to cleats set in concrete and added a secondary line under the surface with chain to catch anything trying to cut through. Evan set up a manual alarm using empty cans on a string along the pier edge. If someone climbed, the line would pull and the cans would rattle. Hank hated it because it made noise. Tara argued we needed noise that we control, noise that means something. Hank accepted it after we moved the cans to a sheltered spot where wind would not trigger them. Those cans became part of the sound map. I learned their exact rattle. We also made a choice that I did not expect we would make. We lit the facility for 1 hour at midday once a week. Not at night, not near dusk. Midday, full sun, we ran the generator, turned on a few interior lights, and let a faint hum travel. It was a signal to anyone watching that the place was occupied and functional. It removed the question that attracts the curious. Empty places attract exploration. Occupied places attract caution. Not always. Sometimes occupied places attract raiders. Still, the unknown is a magnet. We wanted fewer magnets. That 1 hour was our controlled display. We did it with watchers posted and weapons ready and escape routes planned. It felt wrong. It also reduced the number of boats drifting close at dusk, at least for a while. The infected never stopped being part of this. People forget that when human threats show up, the water brings infected in from anywhere. After storms, bodies drift. Some are dead, some move. The ones that move do not drown fast enough. They bump against seawalls and piers and get stuck in corners where tide holds them. We cleared them with poles and pry bars and hard swings, then pushed them back out. We avoided shooting them unless we had no choice. Every time one hit the seawall, I felt my hands move quicker on locks and latches. Every time I saw one face up in the swell, I thought about how close our barrier line sits to water, how a simple slip can become infection, how a small cut can become a death sentence if the wrong fluid gets into it. Marisol kept a strict rule. Any cut gets cleaned immediately, no debate. She enforced it with the cold authority of someone who has watched a patient die from something preventable. Weeks passed in a blur of maintenance and watch and small repairs. Evan changed oil on the generator based on hours, not days. He tracked runtime on a notepad taped to the wall. Owen replaced dock boards with lumber scavenged from shipping pallets. Tara organized our supplies in a way that made sense to her teacher brain. Labels and sections, and a rotating use system so nothing expired in the back. Hank trained us on how to move through the yard at night without silhouetting ourselves against the sky. Marisol kept an eye on everyone's skin, everyone's eyes, everyone's mood, watching for fever, watching for the kind of anger that makes people do reckless things. I became the one who moved between tasks, filling gaps, fixing small things, keeping the group from fraying over stupid arguments. That was my old job skill showing up in a new world. Then the scavengers came in force, not the slow testing kind. It happened on a calm morning after a night that felt almost normal. The sun was out. The water looked harmless. I was on the pier checking the floating barrier line for slack. Owen stood with me, adjusting a knot. Hank was up on the admin roof with binoculars. Tara was inside boiling water for rice. Evan was in the generator building cleaning the fuel polishing cart. Marisol was sorting bandages. Hank's voice came through the handheld radio, short and tight. 2 boats, coming fast, not drifting. I did not answer with words. I clicked the radio once, acknowledgement without sound. Then I ran. We moved into positions the way we had practiced without ever calling it practice. Owen went to the pier access point, ready to cut lines if needed. Hank stayed high, giving eyes. Tara killed the stove and moved supplies away from windows. Evan shut down the generator work and grabbed the fire extinguisher, because fire is a weapon people use when they cannot get through doors. Marisol took the medical bag and stationed in the admin hallway. I went to the causeway lane with Hank's spare binoculars, so I could see what approached by water and land at once. The boats came around the breakwater together. One was the center console we recognized. The other was a small cabin cruiser with a low profile and a dinghy tied behind. Both boats ran engines loud, confident. That confidence told me they expected to win. They did not aim for the causeway. They aimed for the pier because the pier was open, because the pier was access to buildings, because people think boats equal freedom. The center console cut toward our floating barrier line and hit it at an angle, pushing barrels aside. Owen yanked on the anchor line from our side, tightening it. The chain under the surface caught the prop. The engine revved suddenly, then coughed. Then the boat lurched sideways. The cabin cruiser slowed and swung wide, avoiding the barrier, aiming for the outer pier. Hank shouted down from the roof, telling us their path. I heard Tara behind me in the yard, moving fast, dragging a heavy metal shelf toward a doorway to block it. Evan ran with the extinguisher in his hands, face set. The cabin cruiser reached the outer pier and 3 people jumped off with ropes. They moved with coordination. That meant planning. One person tied a line to a cleat. Another ran the rope toward the warehouse door, trying to use it to pull the door open. Maybe to tear it. Maybe to wedge it. Owen stepped out from cover and yelled once, loud enough to carry but not a rant. "Back off! Leave!" The intruders did not back off. One raised a handgun. Hank fired a warning shot into the water again, closer this time, splashing the intruder's boots. The intruder flinched. The second intruder kept running with the rope. The third intruder grabbed a crowbar and started prying at a dock box where we kept spare line. We responded with controlled force and nothing extra. Hank fired another shot into the dock boards between the intruders, splitting wood and making them jump back. Owen used the boat hook to snag the rope and pull it away from the warehouse door, then yanked hard enough that the intruder holding it stumbled. I moved along the inside of the warehouse wall and reached the exterior door we had reinforced with an extra bar. I shoved the bar in place and pressed my shoulder against it, feeling the door vibrate when something hit it from outside. Evan reached the outer pier with the extinguisher and aimed it not at a fire, at faces. He squeezed the handle and a cloud of white powder blasted out, catching one intruder in the chest and face. The intruder staggered back, coughing, wiping eyes. That bought us seconds without gunfire. Tara's voice carried from the yard, telling Evan to stop, save powder, but Evan kept a short burst, then stopped, disciplined. The center console, still tangled, tried to free itself. The engine revved and the prop chewed at chain, then stopped. Someone on board leaned over with a knife, trying to cut rope. Hank fired a shot that hit the water right beside the hand. The hand vanished. The knife dropped. The person shouted words I will not repeat. The cabin cruiser intruders started retreating, dragging their ropes back, pulling the powder-covered man toward the boat. The handgun holder fired one shot toward the facility, not aimed well, more anger than intent. The bullet hit a warehouse wall with a sharp crack that made Tara scream once, then go silent. Nobody got hit. I heard my own teeth grind and forced my jaw loose. We do not get a second chance if we panic. The fight ended without bodies on our dock. That matters, not for morality points, for consequences. Dead people create revenge. Dead people create grief that turns into future raids. Injured people create stories too, but different stories. The intruders pulled away. Cabin cruiser first, center console limping behind after someone on board cut enough of the barrier to free the prop. They backed out of range, then turned and ran toward open water. Hank kept binoculars on them until the boats shrank into dots. Then he came down from the roof and his hands were still steady, but his face looked older. Tara leaned against the hallway wall, eyes wide, and she kept rubbing her forearms with her palms. Not cold, just trying to put herself back together. Evan sat on the floor of the generator building and stared at the extinguisher, then at his hands, then at nothing. Owen walked the pier line and checked every cleat, every knot, every board, silent. Marisol moved through all of us and checked for injuries, touching shoulders, lifting sleeves, looking for blood. None. That felt unreal. After that, we made the hardest decision so far. We stopped trading. Not forever. For a while. We could not afford to be seen as a market. Markets draw customers and thieves. We sealed the causeway lane tighter. We added more barriers scavenged from the motor pool. We reinforced the warehouse doors with extra bars and moved anything valuable away from exterior walls. We created a fallback plan. If a force bigger than us landed on the pier again, we would abandon the outer buildings and retreat to the hardened admin and generator structures, then use the skiff tied under the pier to leave through the back channel only if the facility became untenable. That plan tasted bitter. The whole point of coming here was to stop running. Still, plans that avoid discussion during crisis save lives. In the following days, we watched the coastline more than we watched our own yard. Hank took the roof for long stretches, binoculars glued to his face. Owen and I maintained the floating barrier and added more entanglement points, more chain sections, more hidden snag lines that would foul props. Evan focused on keeping the generator and fuel system stable, filtering diesel, sealing vents, checking water separation daily. Tara started a strict logbook of every event, every boat sighting, every storm shift, every generator hour. She said it was for planning. I think it was for sanity. Marisol set up a tiny isolation area in a back office. Not because anyone was sick, because sooner or later, someone will be. She prepared for that reality without making it dramatic. That is what keeps people alive. One afternoon, we found a message left on the causeway barrier, a plastic bag tied to the chain link. Inside was a note on torn paper and a small packet of dried meat. The note said Kyle wanted to talk, not fight. It said he could bring parts and information. It said there were groups inland clearing infected with heavy equipment. It said there were fires in the next town over. It said he knew we had a generator and that he respected what we built. Respect can be a weapon. Respect can be a lure. Tara wanted to burn the note and ignore it. Evan wanted to answer because parts matter. Hank wanted to set an ambush. Marisol wanted to know why the dried meat smelled faintly sweet, which told her it might be treated or it might be old. Owen wanted to throw it all into the water and tighten the fence. I read the note twice and noticed what it did not say. It did not say sorry. It did not say he would stop coming. It did not say he was alone. We did not answer. We also did not relax. 2 nights later, someone approached the causeway barrier in the dark. I heard it from my watch position near the admin building. Not footsteps in the yard. Footsteps on the concrete outside the fence, on the mainland side. Slow steps, careful, then a pause. Then a soft sound. Metal touching metal, someone testing chain. I signaled Hank with the smallest flashlight flash through a slit in the tarp. Hank moved to his roof position. Owen took the pier corner. Evan killed the small interior light he had been using to clean apart. Tara and Marisol moved into the hallway, silent, ready. We waited. The steps came again, closer to the barrier lane, then stopped. A voice whispered low, almost lost in wind. Trade. One word. Nothing else. No plea, no threat. Just a probe. We stayed silent until the footsteps retreated. That moment made something clear. Isolation is not a wall. Isolation is a posture. You have to keep choosing it. Every day, every night, every time you are tired and hungry, and a stranger offers you a battery. You weigh the battery against the future raid that battery might invite. You weigh medicine against the sickness a new person might bring. You weigh kindness against the weakness kindness signals to predators. There is no clean math. There is only the outcome you live with. I did not become cruel here. I became selective. That change scares me more than infected faces on the shoreline. Months later, we still hold this place. The generator runs short cycles, and Evan talks to it the way he talks to people. Direct, calm, no nonsense. The fuel system is cleaner now, filtered and sealed and treated. The floating barrier line has been rebuilt twice, and now it has more chain than rope. The causeway lane has become a puzzle that only we can navigate quickly. We keep the facility dark at night and quiet during dawn and dusk. We fish. We trap crabs. We plant a small garden in raised bins near the admin building where sun hits and wind is blocked. It is not enough to feel safe. It is enough to keep going. The scavengers still test us sometimes. A boat drifts too close and turns away when the sun flashes off Hank's binocular lenses. A skiff appears near the breakwater and disappears by morning. Once we found a new signal cloth tied to a marker again, and Owen tore it down, and we burned it in a metal drum with the smoke covered by a tarp. We do not win by chasing them. We win by not offering an opening. That is the only victory available now. Tonight, the water calms a little and the wind shifts. The metal clink I heard earlier does not return. I stay crouched on the pier, watching the dark, letting time pass without trying to force it. Behind me, the admin building holds the rest of the group in uneasy sleep. Evan's tools sit organized. Marisol's medical bag sits open in the hallway, always ready. Tara's logbook sits on the table with a pencil on top, waiting for the next entry. Hank's spare rifle magazine sits by the roof hatch. Owen's boat hook leans against the wall beside the door, handle worn smooth by hands that keep working. I stand up slow and move back toward the door, stepping on boards I know will not creak. I pause to look out at the basin one more time. No lights, no voices, just water, black and heavy, carrying whatever the ocean decides to deliver. We chose this isolation because it keeps infected out most days. It also keeps help out every day. It traps us with aging machines, shrinking supplies, and the knowledge that storms will return and strangers will keep trying doors until one opens. I do not tell myself comforting lies. I do not tell myself we are safe. I tell myself we are still here, we are still disciplined, and we have not broken into pieces yet. That is enough for one night.